In July 1683, the people of Vienna woke to find the horizon had changed. Where there had been fields, there was now a city of tents, well over 100,000 men, siege guns, and the horsetail standards of the House of Osman. It had come for the second time in a century and a half to take the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. The empire that sent it ran from the Danube to the Persian Gulf, from the Crimea to the deserts of Algeria. No state in Europe had held together for as long, over as much ground, under a single dynasty. 2 months later, that army would be broken and running. And though nobody outside those walls could have known it, no Ottoman army would ever stand before Vienna again. 400 years earlier, on a hillside in Anatolia, there had been perhaps a dozen war bands like the one that started all this. Same horses, same faith, same tactics, same frontier. Almost every one of them is now a footnote. This is the story of why one of them wasn't, and of the thing they did differently, which was not conquest because everyone conquered. It was that they took people in. At the end of the 13th century, Anatolia had broken into pieces. The Seljuk Sultanate that once ruled it was a Mongol tributary coming apart. What remained of the Byzantine Empire had been gutted, sacked by fellow Christians in the Fourth Crusade, and never really recovered, and clung to the western coast. In between sat perhaps a dozen small Turkish principalities called beyliks, each with a warlord, each raiding whatever lay nearest. One of them in the northwest was so minor that we cannot say with confidence when it was founded. Its leader was a man named Osman. Part of why his people survived is simply where they stood. The other beyliks could only grow by fighting other Turks, costly, and it made enemies of men who fought the same way you did. Osman's people sat against a weakening empire. Every raid brought land, plunder, and something more useful, a reputation for winning. And reputation brought men. The frontier became a magnet for anyone with a horse. Turkish nomads, Byzantine defectors who had lost the wrong civil war, Balkan adventurers, Christian mercenaries who were paid and left to worship as they liked. Early Ottoman armies contained Greeks fighting Greeks. That was the pattern, and it never really changed. Where their rivals asked who your father was, the Ottomans asked what you could do. Ottoman tradition tells a story about Osman. It says he slept one night in a holy man's house and dreamed that a moon rose from the old man's chest and sank into his own, and that from his body grew a tree whose branches shaded the world. It is a good story and almost certainly not a true one. It was written down some 150 years later when the dynasty had an empire and wanted a prophecy to go with it. But it tells you how they had come to see themselves. And a state that believes it is owed the world tends to behave accordingly. Osman died around 1323. His son Orhan took a city. Bursa fell in 1326, and it changed what they were. A raiding band lives on plunder. A state needs a capital, taxes, coins, courts, and men who can count. Within a generation, the Ottomans were minting money, endowing mosques, and paying salaries. In the 1350s, they crossed into Europe, and they were invited. A Byzantine claimant hired them for his own civil war. Having crossed the Dardanelles, they saw how thin the defenses were on the far side, and stayed. Within 30 years, they held Adrianople and made it their capital, renaming it Edirne. The Byzantine emperor was now surrounded by the mercenaries he had hired. Then they built something that had no exact equivalent anywhere. A large standing infantry, paid year-round, loyal to the ruler alone. They built it out of other people's children. Under the devshirme, officials went through the Christian villages of the Balkans and took boys, usually between 8 and 18 every few years. The boys were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained. It should be said plainly what this was. It was a levy of children taken by force from parents who had no say, and most of them never went home. Families hid their sons, marry them off early to make them ineligible, or bribe the officials. Some communities negotiated their way out of it entirely. It should be said just as plainly what it became. Because these boys had no families, no land, and no clan behind them, they owed everything to the Sultan, and so they were trusted with everything. They became the janissaries, and they became the government. The latter went to the top. Grand viziers, the second most powerful men in the empire, were repeatedly men who had arrived as Christian peasant boys in a column on a road. In an age when a European commoner could not dream of command, the Ottoman elite was deliberately not hereditary. Coercion and opportunity in the same institution, both true and neither cancels the other. It's worth being accurate about the comparison. Europe was not helpless. France had permanent ordnance companies. Hungary had a standing field army. Italian states hired professionals year-round. The Ottoman advantage was not that they had soldiers and nobody else did. It was that theirs answered to one man, could not inherit anything, and had nowhere else to go. By the 1380s, they were the strongest power in the Balkans, and a Serbian-led coalition formed to stop them. They met at Kosovo Polja, the Field of Blackbirds, in June 1389. The fighting wrecked both armies and killed both commanders, Prince Lazar of Serbia and Sultan Murad, the only Ottoman sultan ever to die on a battlefield. Militarily, it decided less that day than either side later claimed. Politically, it was decisive. Serbian power in the region was broken, and Serbian lords began entering Ottoman service, some as vassals, some as sons-in-law. The battle would be remembered and re-remembered and eventually weaponized for 600 years by people with reasons of their own. Europe finally took it seriously. In 1396, a crusading army of French, Burgundian, Hungarian, German marched east. At Nicopolis on the Danube, the French knights insisted on the honor of charging first, broke the Ottoman front line, and rode straight into the prepared position behind it. The crusade was destroyed. The next morning, Bayezid had thousands of prisoners executed. The chroniclers say it was reprisal for crusaders killing their own captives during the march. Whatever the reason, it happened, and it was remembered in Europe for a century. Bayezid was called Yildirim, the thunderbolt, for the speed of his marches. After Nicopolis, he blockaded Constantinople and prepared to finish it. Then Timur came west. Timur or Tamerlane was the most successful conqueror of the age, and in 1402 he met Bayezid outside Ankara. It is tempting to say the Ottomans were unlucky. They weren't. Bayezid had spent a decade swallowing the other Anatolian beyliks by force, and their dispossessed lords were riding with Timur. When the armies met, those troops changed sides because the men they were fighting for had taken their lands. Bayezid had also marched his army hard in high summer and given away the water. He chose that ground. The army broke, and Bayezid was captured alive, the only Ottoman sultan ever taken prisoner. He died in captivity within the year. The empire came apart. Timur restored the beyliks Bayezid had absorbed. 4 of Bayezid's sons fought each other for 11 years, and for that decade there was no Ottoman ruler at all, just brothers with armies. And here's the thing that should be strange, and isn't once you understand what they had built. It did not finish them. The state survived because it was not the dynasty. The administrators kept administering. The janissaries stayed loyal to whoever held the treasury. The Balkan vassals mostly stayed put. Mehmed won the civil war and reassembled it. His son Murad Set held it. Within 50 years of total collapse, they would take the greatest prize in the medieval world. That capacity to lose everything and reassemble is the most underrated thing about them. In 1100 years, Constantinople had fallen to a foreign army exactly once. In 1204, it was stormed and sacked by the soldiers of the Fourth Crusade. who had set out to fight in Egypt and stopped to loot the richest Christian city on earth instead. They held it for 57 years. It never fully recovered. Every other siege had failed. Persians, Avars, Arabs, Rus, Bulgars, the walls held. By 1451, the empire was a shadow. The city, some Aegean islands, a strip of the Peloponnese. Perhaps 50,000 people lived inside walls built for 500,000. Whole districts had gone back to orchards and fields. Its ruler was Constantine the Palaiologos, and he had inherited a job that no longer existed. He had spent years trying to buy help from the West, and the price was union with the Roman Church, which he accepted and which much of his own clergy and people bitterly rejected. He was crowned in Greece, not in Hagia Sophia. He would be the last man to hold a title that ran back to Augustus. In 1451, Murad II died, and his son took the throne. Mehmed II was 19. He had been sultan once before, as a boy of 12, and it had gone badly enough that the Janissaries mutinied, and his father was called back to rule again. He had been humiliated in front of the men he would one day command, and he had not forgotten it. Europe's ambassadors reported that the new sultan was young, untested, and no cause for concern. It was one of the great misreadings of the century. Within a year, he built a fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, at its narrowest point, opposite one his great-grandfather had built. Together they could close the strait. He called it Boskasen, the strait cutter, or, with deliberate double meaning, the throat cutter. The city's grain came through that strait. Then a Hungarian engineer named Orban offered to build the emperor a very large gun. Constantine could not pay him, so Orban went to Mehmed, who characteristically did not care where the man came from. What he built was among the largest cannon of the age, bronze, some 8 meters long, throwing a stone ball weighing more than half a ton. 60 oxen moved it. It took hours to reload and could fire only a handful of times a day. It did not need to be quick. It needed to break the land walls, which no army had ever broken. The siege began in April 1453. Inside the walls, the emperor had his men counted. Fewer than 5,000 Greeks could carry a weapon, with the Italian volunteers perhaps 7,000 in all. He ordered the number kept secret. Outside, Mehmed had an army that contemporaries put at 200,000. Modern estimates run far lower, 50 to 80,000. Not low enough to matter. The guns fired for 6 weeks, and the walls came down in sections. And every night, the defenders rebuilt them with rubble, earth, and timber, which absorbed shot better than the stone had. The great gun cracked and had to be repaired. Assaults failed. An Ottoman attempt to tunnel under the walls was found and flooded by a German engineer working for the defense. And the Golden Horn, the deep harbor along the weakest wall, was closed by a chain. 4 Christian ships fought their way through the entire Ottoman fleet in full view of both armies and got into the city. Mehmed, watching from the shore, is said to have ridden his horse into the sea in rage. 6 weeks in, he was not obviously winning, so he went around it. Over a single night, his engineers laid a greased timber road across the hills behind Galata and dragged some 70 ships overland, past the chain and down into the Golden Horn. The defenders woke to an enemy fleet in a harbor they believed was sealed, and now had to man a seawall as well, with men they did not have. It is one of the great feats of military improvisation. It did not win the siege by itself, but it stretched a defense that was already too thin, and the defenders never recovered the initiative. The final assault came before dawn on the 29th of May. Mehmed sent his irregulars first, then the Anatolian regiments, and finally, when the defenders had been fighting for hours without relief, the Janissaries. Accounts say a small gate, the caricature, was found unbarred. Ottoman troops got inside. On the walls, the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani, who had held the defense together for 7 weeks, was badly wounded and carried to a ship. His men saw him go, and the line broke. Constantine Forninius is said to have thrown off his imperial regalia and gone into the fighting as an ordinary soldier. His body was never identified. With him ended the Roman Empire, 1,480 years after Augustus. A city taken by storm was, by the law of the age, given to the soldiers. Constantinople was sacked. Thousands were killed. A large part of the surviving population was enslaved. Churches were stripped. This is not disputed by anyone, including Ottoman sources, and there is no version of the day that is not brutal. Mehmed, 21 years old, and from that day Fatih, the conqueror, rode to Hagia Sophia and ordered it preserved and converted to a mosque. Then he did the thing that actually mattered. He set about refilling the city he had just emptied. He resettled populations from across the empire by incentive and by compulsion: Muslims, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews. And he installed a new Orthodox patriarch. The seat had stood empty since before the siege, choosing a churchman who had led the opposition to union with Rome. The church stayed intact and answerable to him. Not from sentiment, a functioning hierarchy was easier to tax and to hold responsible than a leaderless one. Within a generation, Constantinople was the largest city in Europe again. For Europe, 1453 was a rupture. The eastern bulwark was gone, and the Mediterranean had a single dominant power at its eastern end. Greek scholars had already been carrying manuscripts west for decades, and more followed. The fall accelerated something that was underway. It did not, whatever you may have heard, close the spice routes. Trade through Alexandria and Aleppo continued in volume for another century. The Ottomans taxed it. They did not strangle it. Portugal was already sailing down the African coast before the city fell. What 1453 changed was not the map of trade. It was who everyone else now had to reckon with. Mehmed's grandson, Selim, ruled 8 years and roughly doubled the empire. He got the throne by forcing his own father to abdicate and secured it by having his brothers and their sons killed. This was not an aberration. Mehmed the Conqueror had written it into law. A sultan who took the throne might execute his brothers for the good order of the world. It was a system designed to prevent another 11-year civil war like the one after Ankara. A rational solution arrived at honestly that cost the lives of children. The Ottomans knew what it was. They did it anyway for 200 years. His enemies were east. A new Persian dynasty, the Safavids, had made Shia Islam a state religion and was pulling Anatolian tribes away from Ottoman loyalty. A threat to the empire's internal cohesion more than its borders. Selim answered it with mass executions of suspected sympathizers inside Anatolia before he ever marched. At Chaldiran in 1514, Ottoman guns and Janissary muskets beat Safavid cavalry decisively. 2 years later, he turned on the Mamluks of Egypt and destroyed them in 2 battles. Marj Dabik in 1516, Ridania in 1517. With Egypt came guardianship of Mecca and Medina, and of the pilgrimage routes. Later tradition claims the last Abbasid caliph formally handed Selim the title of caliph in Cairo. Historians are skeptical. That story surfaces centuries afterwards, and the Ottomans only pressed the caliphal claim hard much later when they needed it. But the substance was plain. The most powerful Muslim ruler alive now held Islam's holiest ground. Selim died in 1520. His only surviving son ruled for 46 years, and Europe called him the Magnificent. His own people called him Kanuni, the Lawgiver. The conquest came fast. Belgrade in 1521, Rhodes in 1522, and in 1526 at Mohacs, The Hungarian army was destroyed in about 2 hours. King Louis II drowned in a stream while fleeing. The Kingdom of Hungary effectively ceased to exist. 3 years later, Suleiman stood outside Vienna and failed. The weather did not beat him. His planning did. He had begun the campaign too late in the season for a target that far up the Danube, and the rain that cost him his heavy siege guns was the rain that falls in Central Europe every autumn. He had reached the practical limit of how far an army could march from Istanbul and still fight. After 2 weeks in the first snow, he withdrew. It was the furthest they had ever come. It was also the first time a European capital had turned them back, and it would take another century and a half before anyone found out whether the limit had moved. Conquest is not why his own people named him. The harder question was never how to take territory. It was how to hold an empire of Greeks, Serbs, Arabs, Kurds, Armenians, Hungarians, and Turks without it flying apart. Suleiman's answer was paperwork. He inherited a legal patchwork and spent his reign rationalizing it. A body of sultanic law, the Kanun, running alongside religious law and covering taxation, land tenure, criminal penalties, and what a peasant owed and was owed. It was written down and applied from Buda to Baghdad. Some of it stood for 3 centuries. The lawgiver's law did not bind the lawgiver. In 1536, he had Ibrahim Pasha, his grand vizier of 13 years and by every account his closest friend, strangled in the palace after a private dinner. In 1553, he had his own son Mustafa, the popular heir, strangled in the imperial tent while the army that loved him waited outside. Both were political calculations, and both were the system working exactly as designed. Absolute power, with no institution able to check it. You cannot describe this empire honestly without both halves. The same reign produced a legal code that protected peasants from their own governors, and a father who killed his son to keep the succession clean, and it produced Sinan. Mimar Sinan served as chief imperial architect for half a century, himself a devshirme recruit, taken as a boy from an Anatolian Christian family, and built or supervised hundreds of works: mosques, bridges, aqueducts, hospitals, baths. His Suleymaniye in Istanbul and his Selimiye at Edirne are among the great buildings anywhere, and they were a deliberate argument that the empire could not merely capture the old world's masterpieces, but answer them. And there was Hurrem, a woman taken as a slave from Ruthenia, Roxolana in Europe, became Suleiman's consort and then, breaking long custom, his legal wife. She advised him, corresponded with foreign monarchs, and endowed mosques and charities in her own name. Her rise began a period, sometimes called the Sultanate of Women, when mothers and consorts held real political power, which contemporaries resented for exactly the reason you would expect. Which brings us back to the spine of the whole thing. The Ottomans did not try to make everyone the same. Non-Muslim communities largely ran their own religious affairs, courts and schools under their own leaders. They paid a specific tax, the jizya, and they were legally subordinate. Their testimony carried less weight. There were restrictions on dress, on building, on riding horses in some places, and the subordination was the point, not an oversight. It is worth being precise because this gets flattened in both directions. There was no tidy empire-wide millet system in Suleiman's day. That formal structure is largely an 18th and 19th century development. What existed earlier was a patchwork of local arrangements, negotiated case by case and varying enormously between Salonika and Baghdad. Measured against modern standards, it was not equality. Measured against contemporary Europe, where states expelled and forcibly converted religious minorities as policy, it was a functioning alternative. When Spain expelled its Jews in 1492, Bayezid II ordered his provincial governors to receive them and not to hinder them. Thousands settled in Salonika and Istanbul, and Salonika became a majority Jewish city for 400 years. The Ottomans were not tolerant on principle. They were tolerant because it paid. A merchant left alone pays tax every year, and a rebellion costs an army. That is a less flattering reason and a much more durable one. In October 1571, off the coast of Greece, a combined Christian fleet met the Ottoman navy at Lepanto and destroyed it in an afternoon. Europe celebrated as though a war had ended. Bells rang in Rome and Venice. Within a year, the Ottomans had rebuilt the fleet. The Grand Vizier is supposed to have told a Venetian envoy that in taking Cyprus, the Ottomans had cut off Venice's arm, while at Lepanto, Venice had merely shaved the Ottoman beard, and a beard grows back. The line is probably too neat to be literal. It was also broadly correct. Cyprus stayed Ottoman, and so did the Eastern Mediterranean. What Lepanto changed was not the balance of power, it was the belief that there wasn't one. The Ottomans had been checked before, at Belgrade in 1456, outside Vienna in 1529, on Malta only 6 years earlier. But those were sieges that failed. This was an imperial fleet annihilated in a single afternoon by a Europe that had, for once, managed to act together. The standard account of the next century says the empire rotted. Idle sultans, a degenerate army, a stagnant East overtaken by a modernizing West. It is a tidy story, and it is mostly wrong. Sultans did stop leading armies, but power did not evaporate. It moved to the Grand Viziers, to the households of the great pashas, to the imperial women. That is not decay. It is what happens in any state that outgrows the physical capacity of one man, and something similar was happening across Europe. And the empire kept winning. In 1669, it took Crete from Venice after a siege of 21 years. Under the Caprili Viziers, a single family that effectively ran the empire for half a century, the finances were repaired, the army rebuilt, and the frontier pushed forward again. As late as the 1660s, the Ottomans were an expanding power. What did change was the rate of change elsewhere. Europe's near-constant warfare drove drill, standardization, state finance, and permanent bureaucracies at a speed nobody could match from a standing start. The Janissaries, once the most modern force in the world, had become hereditary, married, and commercially entangled, and they resisted reforms that threatened their position, deposing sultans who pushed too hard. The Ottoman problem was not that they stopped. It was that they had built something that worked so well that changing it was extremely expensive, and their rivals, who had nothing that good, had nothing to lose. Which brings us back to July 1683, Ankara Mustafa Pasha. He had choices, and the ones he made are why he is remembered. He bypassed fortresses he should have reduced, leaving his supply line long and exposed. He chose to starve the city into surrender rather than storm it early, when he had the men to do it. Reportedly because a city that surrendered could be taxed, while a city taken by storm belonged to his soldiers. And he did not seriously secure the heights above the city, where a relief army would have to come from. For 2 months, the Ottomans mined under the walls, blowing breach after breach. The garrison shrank week by week. Food ran out. By early September, the defenders were nearly finished. Then on the 12th of September, an army appeared on the heights. Polish, Austrian, and German forces under John III Sobieski, King of Poland. In the late afternoon, they came down the slope. Some 18,000 horsemen, among the largest cavalry charges ever made, with Sobieski's winged hussars at the point. The Ottoman army was strung out around its own siege works, facing the wrong way, caught between the relief force and the garrison. It broke. They left the camp, The tents, the guns, the treasury, the coffee. Kara Mustafa reached Belgrade and was executed there on the Sultan's order, strangled with a silk cord as custom prescribed for a man of his rank. Vienna had failed before, in 1529, and little had followed. This time the failure created something that had never existed, a durable coalition. Austria, Poland, Venice, and later Russia fought together for 16 years. And at the end of it, the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 did something new. The Ottoman Empire negotiated as a defeated power and signed away Hungary and Transylvania. They were not finished. They retook the Morea from Venice in 1715 and held it. They beat Russia and Austria badly enough in 1739 to take Belgrade back. The map would move both ways for a long time yet. But the ceiling was now visible. For 4 centuries, the question in Europe had been how far the Ottomans would come. After 1689, the question was how much they could keep. They lasted another 223 years after Karlowitz. They reformed themselves repeatedly, survived wars that dismembered older states, and ended having existed for 623 years under one family, which is longer than the distance between us and Columbus. It began with one warband among a dozen on a frontier in a beylik so minor that we cannot date its founding. What made it different was never that they fought better. It was that they kept absorbing. A Hungarian gun founder, a Greek defector, a Christian farmer's son who became Grand Vizier, a slave girl who became an empress. Whole cities of people other kingdoms had thrown away. And the century they spent at the top was the century they stopped needing to. How the longest-lived empire of the modern age finally came apart is the rest of the story.